It's the 29th of June 2017 and in Chatham, Kent, South England, it's a sunny morning. As usual, the car park of the town shopping centre is busy and now one shopper, Benjamin Moulton, is suddenly racing towards a Citroën. Moments later, the owner of the car, 23-year-old Molly McLaren, whose head and neck are dripping with blood, lies still in the passenger seat. She's dead. Moulton may well never forgive himself. When, on reaching the car, you see, he'd grabbed the leg of 26-year-old Joshua Stimpson, who, half inside the driver's doorway, was stabbing Molly over and over. Stimpson shook him off and climbed all the way into the car, where he continued his attack. If double-glazing salesman Joshua Stimpson from Wooldham in Kent couldn't have sport and fitness student Molly McLaren, then neither could anyone else. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the story so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. Born and raised in Stoke-on-Trent in the West Midlands of England, Joshua Stimpson felt abandoned when his mother walked out of the family home, never to return, leaving her son in the care of his father. As a result of this trauma, which came when he was 12, Stimpson developed something of a split personality. On the one hand, he could come across as charming, bright and lively. On the other hand, he could behave like a depressed, irrational loner who couldn't engage in conversation. Having since moved to Wooldham in Kent, Stimpson's depression, also triggered by the departure of Stimpson's mother, led to Stimpson's becoming an outpatient at Kingsley House Mental Health Clinic, located in Kent. However, since neither Stimpson's clinical treatment nor the antidepressant drugs that he started taking in 2016 could spare Molly McLaren from her devastating fate at Stimpson's hands, it's fair to say, I think, that those two things wouldn't have spared Stimpson's previous girlfriends from his obsessive and aggressive behaviour either. In 2013, when, aged 21, Stimpson was still living in the West Midlands, Staffordshire to be exact, he received both a text and a voicemail from Staffordshire Police ordering him to stop his harassment of a woman by the name of Alexandra Dale. Stimpson had been threatening and harassing Alexandra by text for months. Her mother reports that he slashed the tyres of her car too, but that, owing to a lack of evidence, police were unable to pursue a case against Stimpson. Even after his official warning from the police, Stimpson subsequently texted Alexandra when she was on holiday abroad to say, "I'm going to fly out and drown you." He then followed up that message with another saying, "If you ever touch my family, I'll stab you." There are two particular points to be noted here. Firstly, Alexandra had never even met or mentioned Stimpson's family. Secondly, she and Stimpson had only ever had one date. Surprisingly, but also thankfully, Stimpson stopped stalking and harassing the woman that he briefly dated in May 2016, Leah Hubbard, when she threatened to report him to the police if he didn't stay away from her. Prior to this, Stimpson had, on one occasion, followed her to a bar and spat drink on her face. When in November 2016, after chatting to each other online for 4 months prior, Stimpson and Molly met in person, Molly believed she was meeting someone who had never dated. That's what Stimpson had told her. As for Molly herself, Stimpson was to be her first serious boyfriend, and, sadly, her last. When they meet Stimpson, Molly's friends are almost immediately on guard against him. On account of how happy he'd been making Molly in their 3 months of dating so far, they'd expected to find him lively, friendly and engaging. Instead, however, they got the markedly antisocial side to Stimpson's character, which, you may recall, springs from Stimpson's childhood trauma.
When I met him, he wasn't overly chatty, and obviously I was always going to be welcoming because that's my friend's boyfriend. I made a joke about something, and after me and Molly left, he was messaging her later, trying to get in between me and Molly, so that shocked me a lot, and it instantly put me off.
Molly is seeing Stimpson's truly nasty side for the first time. Her friends agree that her boyfriend's abusive and aggressive response to her request for space from him, meaning that he should stop turning up at her home unannounced and stop, similarly, sitting in with her, literally in her room, when she's undertaking hours of necessary study, is wholly out of order. In Stimpson, Molly has a fellow fitness fanatic and, importantly, someone who understands only too well both her history as a bulimic and the mental health issues associated with that. I can't say though whether this, along with Stimpson's promise to change, plays a part in her decision to take Stimpson back shortly after dumping him, as she does in March 2017. Molly can't wait to come back from her holiday to Tenerife, which she goes on in May 2017. She's missing her family, she's missing her friends, and of course, she's missing the time before she met her double-glazing salesman boyfriend. Stimpson hasn't changed. He follows Molly wherever she goes, never letting her see her friends without him.
He would invite himself out on group nights out that she hadn't invited him to. So, for example, she would go to a gig and he would say, oh, cool, what time are we leaving? Or who else is coming? So it was almost without being invited. I think, again, that was a flag that really he didn't want her to have any alone time with her friends. And
it is, arguably, hard to understand why Molly only dumped Stimpson for good weeks later. On the 17th of June, in a busy nightclub, Stimpson dramatically gets up, angrily declaring she's finished with me, and walks out, leaving Molly and her many friends visibly shaken. Molly and Stimpson had been arguing all night after arguing all week, having clearly not resolved the issues springing from their recent holiday to Tenerife. The issue was that Stimpson just kept silencing his girlfriend. Whenever she tried to speak to him, he just shut her down. Had Molly dumped him straight after they returned, she may well have had a vastly more enjoyable 23rd birthday celebration. That, you see, was what her night out on the 17th of June was. Molly and her mother listen in on the phone call that takes place between Stimpson and the police on the 22nd of June 2017. In a state of shock and confusion, Molly later recounts to her friends just how callous, cold and unrepentant Stimpson's attitude had been. He was in no way sorry for the libelous and abusive messages against Molly that he had since been posting to social media and to WhatsApp. Nor was he sorry for getting a woman that he basically engaged as a spy to get Molly, who had a fitness blog, to friend her on Facebook so that the woman could report Molly's every move to him exactly as she'd been doing after Molly had duly blocked him. As evidence against Stimpson for his harassment of her, Molly had presented police with screenshots of his messages. By the end of his conversation with the police, however, Stimpson was nothing less than, amused, presumably. He had made no promise to end his harassment of Molly, and, sure enough, 3 days later, Stimpson made a further derogatory and libelous post about Molly. Stimpson had no fear. He was aware that police weren't viewing his actions as harassment and that he was, as such, not committing a criminal offence. He felt untouchable. His subsequent removal of the post, which was about 3 days later, was just to play with Molly. He'd already bought the weapons with which he planned to imminently kill her, you see. His showing up at the same restaurant as Molly and her friends the day after removing the post was essentially a warning to Molly. Against what she may have thought when she learned that he had removed his latest post about her, he wasn't going anywhere. She would never be rid of him. Stimpson had turned up to the restaurant with a date from Tinder, having learned through his spy that Molly would be there. Shocked and scared, Molly and her friends hastily brought their evening to an end. Molly was, of course, right when, the next morning, the 29th of June 2017, in the middle of her workout at Pure Gym in Chatham Shopping Centre, she got up, went over to Stimpson and basically accused him of following her. Having joined Molly in that space, where she'd been for some time before his arrival, Stimpson had, as such, ignored the numerous other workout rooms that he could have used instead. In response to the frantic texts that Molly sent them as soon as she moved to another space, as she hastily did, her mother and her friends all urged her to leave the gym and come home straight away. They were unaware, of course, that that would be their final contact with Molly ever. When Molly subsequently left the gym and walked to her car, Stimpson was lying in wait, with his knife. He stabbed Molly 75 times.
When CCTV cameras captured Stimpson following Molly up into a gym in the dockside area of Chatham, he was already guilty of stalking her. The 26-year-old, who'd been warned about his obsessive behaviour by the police, appears to turn and leave, only to return and take revenge for his rejection.
Yeah, 136, State 6.
When police were called by people who saw his frenzied attack on his ex-girlfriend, they found Stimpson covered in Molly's blood. He'd stabbed her 75 times and slashed her throat. Joshua Stimpson claimed he was suffering from a mental condition, but the jury said it was murder.
If Stimpson's harassment of Alexandra Dale wasn't logged with the police, why wasn't it? If it was, why wasn't stronger action taken against Stimpson for his harassment of Molly? And how can a cosy chinwag over the phone between the police and an alleged harasser or stalker seriously be expected to change that person's behaviour? In February 2018, Stimpson was sentenced to a minimum of 26 years for the murder of Molly McLaren. In the evening of the 12th of October 2016, a young woman by the name of Maxine McGill from Gateshead, North East England, is in a thorough state of shock and devastation when she calls the police to notify them that, having just returned home, she has found her flatmate lying on the bathroom floor in a pool of blood. Police, who arrive minutes later, find that the body of 24-year-old Alice Ruggles has a vast opening in the neck. Sometime earlier that day, 26-year-old Trimaan Dhillon had climbed through a window of Alice's flat, chased Alice into the bathroom, pinned her on her front to the floor, pulled her head back, and, with a carving knife from Alice's kitchen, sliced her throat from ear to ear no fewer than 6 times. Dhillon had slashed Alice with so much force, in fact, that he cut into her spinal cord. If Lance Corporal Trimaan Dhillon couldn't have Alice, then no one could. Born and raised in India, Dhillon was an only child. Owing to Dhillon's father being in the army, Dhillon's childhood involved a lot of moving round. As well as being very loving, Dhillon's parents were wealthy. Their son attended Catholic schools and went to military academies. They also endowed him with horse riding lessons along with numerous holidays to America and Europe. When, in 2010, Dhillon, aged 19, came to the UK, he appeared, by all accounts, to instantly embrace the culture in which he was now immersed, so very different as it was to the ways and customs of his home country. Partying with scantily clad young women, for instance, was one recreational pursuit, which is presumably a lot less common back home, that he rapidly and eagerly took to. Dhillon was in the UK to undertake the 2 years of study at Queen Margaret University near Edinburgh in Scotland, required by the degree in strategy management that he'd started in India. He'd wanted the education and the experience to be had from a university degree before enlisting with the army, following in his father's footsteps, as he was duly planning. And sure enough, 2 years on, Dhillon was stationed in Canterbury, Kent, South England, as a non-commissioned officer with the Royal Regiment of Scotland. Dhillon partied in places where many young women were vastly underdressed. He made lots of friends and frequently socialised with them. He delighted in student culture and in Western freedoms. But Dhillon also clung to his long-ingrained belief that a man automatically owned the woman that he was dating. His mother, in fact, was the one and only woman that his father had ever dated, and it may well be, likewise, that his father was the only sentimental partner that his mother had ever had. In Dhillon's culture, you see, which followed strict Sikh values, this was normal.
In fact, during his trial, Dhillon explained the swift engagement at first was due to his upbringing. He said, if you start going out with a girl, it's likely that that's the girl you're going to stay with. In my parents' case, the first girl my father met, he married. And this suggests that he may have struggled to accept the freedoms that British women, especially, enjoy, especially when it comes to sex and relationships.
Eniko Nemeth, an 18-year-old Bulgarian woman, accepted Dhillon's marriage proposal even though she'd only been going out with Dhillon for 3 months at the time. Having met Dhillon in September 2012, Eniko was his first girlfriend. Dhillon didn't care that there were people around when, one day on a busy Kent high street, he got in front of Eniko and blocked her way. Dhillon's disrespectful and bullying ways were, in fact, precisely why Eniko, who was on her way to meet her new boyfriend, had since dumped Dhillon. Minutes after publicly corralling Eniko, more or less, Dhillon texted her to tell her that he was glad that they were no longer together since she was, to paraphrase, a pathetic little wimp.
Almost immediately after, Dhillon then sent derogatory and unpleasant texts to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that he was glad he was no longer with her because she was a complete pussy who was scared of him, and that he wanted to make her cry and get a reaction out of her.
Dhillon subsequently told the police, to whom Eniko had reported his behaviour, that he had accidentally spat in his ex-girlfriend's face while talking to her on the high street. Dhillon is a vicious, vindictive murderer, unlike Eniko Nemeth. I feel, as such, that one should believe Eniko's version of the story, which is that Dhillon aggressively confronted her new boyfriend, who turned up while Dhillon was practically cornering her. Dhillon answered her question about whether he was going to hit her, which she made after bravely stepping between the two men, by leaning into her and spitting directly in her face. We've seen that Dhillon felt that a woman is literally the property of her boyfriend or husband. Property is, generally, something that one is in control of. As an ignorant laywoman, I deem that Dhillon felt that, whatever his circumstances, he had to be the one calling the shots, the one in control. To Dhillon, Eniko's new boyfriend had broken Dhillon's control of Eniko. He expressed this in his confrontation with the man, effectively accusing him of stealing his property.
He told her new partner that he wanted to talk to him like a gentleman and asked, "Why did you take my girlfriend away from me? Don't you think after a breakup it can be solved?"
Likewise, even though serving with the army had been a key ambition of his, and even though he knew, I believe, that he would, initially at least, be following orders, not giving them, in his role as a newly recruited NCO posted in Kent, Dhillon was, say certain sources, forever looking to control.
When he was assigned to barracks in Canterbury via the military, those in positions of relative authority thought he was outspoken and manipulative, playing people off against each other, and was seen as someone who would regularly question orders and answer back.
Dhillon gave Alice Ruggles a very different impression of his life in the army. The attempts of Eniko Nemeth, or, as Dhillon presented her to Alice, his crazy ex-girlfriend, to get a restraining order against him was blocked, Dhillon said, by none other than the army. Even during the first 3 months of Dhillon's and Alice's relationship, which, having begun in October 2015, was purely online, Dhillon was already given indications of his true colours. His reason for asking Alice to switch all her social media to private was so that other men, especially army men, couldn't look at her. It angered him when, around Christmas 2015, Alice attended an event that he had asked her not to attend. If you're wishing that Alice had kicked Dhillon to the curb at this point of the relationship, you're not the only one. By summer 2016, Alice had become worryingly skinny, had lost most of her friends, and, having correspondingly fallen out with her housemates, had moved into a new house. And it was all because of her boyfriend.
Alice was one of these people who always had a smile on her face.
She always understood what you were thinking, what you were doing. She always knew the right thing to say.
He took her to places.
He bought her presents. He was a real gentleman.
It didn't seem malicious at the time.
As the relationship moved on, strange things started to happen. She started to lose friends.
She couldn't wear what she wanted to wear. She could only wear what he thought was appropriate for her to wear.
She started to lose weight. She started to lose self-confidence.
He demanded to know where she was going and what she was doing. Unannounced, he'd just drive down to Newcastle and turn up. It was quite clear there was something seriously wrong. But we couldn't talk to her about it because he was always there.
There were relentless, weepy voicemails full of begging and pleading. There were messages to Alice's friends and family, again all full of begging specifically for intervention from them. There was the hacking of Alice's phone and of her social media. There was anger from the learning, through the hacking of Alice's Facebook, that she had met someone new. Alice was Dhillon's property, remember? That's how, in his warped and deluded mind, Lance Corporal Trimaan Dhillon saw her. She had, as such, no right to dump Dhillon as she had in August 2016 on learning of her boyfriend's systematic cheating. According to experts, with their stalking, spurned lovers, if you will, don't seriously expect to win their romantic partner back. The stalking, whether in the form of relentless messages to the victim, relentless messages to the friends and family of the victim, or the hacking into the phones and social media belonging to the victim, like Dhillon's own stalking of Alice initially was, is meant as a substitute for the relationship. Stalkers, say experts, usually give up their stalking after about 2 weeks. When the stalking lasts longer than that, the perpetrator should be dealt with by the police a lot more seriously. The same goes for cases in which the stalker has a military background and cases in which the stalker has a police record for similar behaviour. The same mistakes that were made by the police in the case of Clare Bernal, whose own stalker, Michael Pech, who stalked her for months and had served 6 years in the Slovakian army, were made by the police who dealt with Alice's stalking. For some reason, when on the 30th of September 2016, following weeks and weeks of stalking and harassment from Dhillon, having so far shunned the advice of her family and friends to involve the police, which she'd done in order to spare Dhillon, Alice finally felt compelled to relay her situation with her ex-boyfriend to the police. All the police did was to send Dhillon a PIN, Police Information Notice. This is an official caution whose purpose is to inform the alleged harasser that their behaviour is unacceptable.
Evening, Northumbria Police.
Hi there, I just need a bit of advice really, more than anything. So I split up with my boyfriend about 3 months ago. Since then, I know that he's hacked into my Facebook and also my phone. He's been sending me a lot of messages even though I've asked him not to contact me. I'm concerned, like my friends have been telling me to call the police. I've been putting it off, but I just feel a bit like shaken up tonight, so...
Report it directly to the police now, and we can issue one with a PIN notice, which means if he ever comes near you again or contacts you again, he'll be arrested.
The PIN was delivered to Dhillon by text. Shortly before Alice's call to the police that day, Dhillon had climbed over her garden fence and left flowers and chocolates on her sill. Just before then, he had hidden on each of the 3 occasions on which Alice had come to her front door after he knocked. So, police deemed a PIN an appropriate response in a case of stalking in which the actual stalking had lasted way longer than 2 weeks, in which the stalker was a serving army officer, and in which the stalker had a prior complaint of harassment on police file. Even with no police record, on the 13th of September 2005, 30-year-old Michael Pech, ex-army, stalker of months, shot 22-year-old Clare Bernal dead at Harvey Nichols in London. UK police learned nothing from this, it seems. Northumbria police specifically responded with notable inaction when, a few days after Dhillon's late-night call to Alice's home, which landed him with a PIN, Alice reported to them the letter and photos that Dhillon had since sent to her by post.
She was phoned back by the police, and all we know is Alice was so upset by this because the lady on the phone said, well, what do you expect us to do about it? Arrest him? In a tone of voice that made it sound completely ridiculous to want that.
I just can't even comprehend the level of despair someone has to be at, because they essentially knew, given the last interaction with the police, that they were on their own.
When someone denies something that they haven't been accused of, or answers a question that they haven't been asked, it's usually, I believe, a cause for concern.
I just wanted to kill you further than chocolate. You prove that, no, I don't want to kill you. I'm not intending to kill you. That's all I wanted to say. Killing you is something that I've never, ever thought about. And I will never, ever even think about that.
As many have said, Dhillon's voicemail to Alice from the night when he came to her back window with a couple of romantic gifts, in which he vowed not to kill her, was, in reality, a veiled threat.
I'm not going to kill you. Why would you think I'll kill you?
I wouldn't kill you.
Although he was talking about it in the negative context, I'm not going to kill you. There's definitely a veiled threat.
When he mentions not killing you about 10 times in this voicemail, which is really weird.
We have Alice's phone pinging off a mast, because they connect to masts, alright, that's what the GPRS is about, on the A1, near the Kenton area. The route you've told us that you have driven after you've left the house. Yeah? What I'm saying to you is, you have taken Alice's phone. What have you got to say about that?
No comment. So that may suggest you're lying about the altercation with Alice in the backyard. Is that right?
No comment.
We know exactly what you did. We've been told exactly what happened to her. Sat here for 2 days, showing no remorse whatsoever.
You said you loved her. You didn't love her. You thought if you can't have her, no one else can have her.
In 2017, Dhillon was sentenced to a minimum of 22 years for Alice's murder. It is 7:50 p.m. on the 13th of September 2005. Together with a colleague, 22-year-old Clare Bernal, who works at a beauty counter at Harvey Nichols in Knightsbridge, London, is doing some tidying up. With only 10 minutes to go before closing time, the store is quiet. Clare's colleague has just become a witness to both a murder and a suicide. After shooting Clare in the back of the head and then 3 times in the face, the man who the colleague had, moments before, suddenly seen standing behind Clare, fired a shot into the ceiling before turning the gun on himself. When 30-year-old ex-soldier Michael Pech murdered Clare, he was out on bail following his lengthy and relentless campaign of stalking and harassment against her. Clare's mother, Trimaan Bernal, is the first person that Clare tells when, in 2003, she lands a job at the La Prairie beauty counter in Harvey Nichols, a famous London department store. Clare isn't happy about having to move away from her mother and the rest of her family, who live in Kent, in order to take the job. But she shares her flat in Dulwich, South London, with 2 great friends. She gets the clubs, bars and restaurants that London offers, and of course, she gets a job that she loves. When, in early 2005, he takes Clare on dates, Slovakian security guard Michael Pech, who also works at Harvey Nichols, where he met Clare, compliments her on her clothes and shoes and is highly attentive towards her. Clare is naturally flattered. Pech, who was at this point in the middle of divorcing his wife who lived in Slovakia, had come to England 2 years before. He had entered on a student visa, having left his job at the American Embassy in Bratislava beforehand. He got his job at Harvey Nichols when Slovakia joined the EU, an event that afforded Pech the freedom to live and work in the UK with no restrictions. By the end of the first of her 3 dates with Pech, Clare was feeling less flattered by his attention and more confused or nonplussed. She was speechless, you see, when, at the end of that date, Pech told her that he loved her. Pech didn't want Clare to spend time with anyone other than him. He hated it then when Clare went out with her friends or went to see her family down in Kent.
Clare phoned me up and said, "Mum, I feel really uncomfortable. He just wants to be with me the whole time. He doesn't want me to see my friends. He doesn't like me going home. I'm feeling suffocated."
3 weeks of such controlling, obsessive and wholly unreasonable behaviour from Pech were 3 weeks too many for Clare. She was about to learn, however, that this former soldier was someone who just wouldn't take no for an answer.
"If you dare to report me, I'm going to kill you, remember that."
Pech even asks other staff members at Harvey Nichols to get Clare to speak to him. But when Clare actually does gently and respectfully address Pech, having been persuaded to do so by some of her colleagues who have assured her that Pech just wants to be her friend, she innocently triggers some further harassment from him.
Another time, after the 28th of February, I was leaving work when Michael approached me in full security uniform and stopped me by placing his hands on my shoulders from behind.
A few weeks before now, having got Clare to meet him at the airport on his return from a trip to Slovakia, Pech had refused to leave her flat. It seems that he hadn't told Clare when he persuaded her to let him come round that, on account of his suitcase being too heavy, according to him, to lug around London, he was wanting to stay the night. Sometime later, at the train station where he'd finally agreed to go to get himself home, as long as Clare accompanied him there, as she did, he changed his mind about actually going home. Clare ignored the 20 or so calls that he made to her when he subsequently returned to her flat and waited outside for a total of 2 hours. Clare's flatmate was unable to succeed where Clare herself had failed. When she took over asking Pech to leave, she got nothing but abuse from Pech in response. I don't understand why Clare even went to meet Pech at the airport, never mind bringing him back to her flat. But firstly, she didn't deserve Pech's subsequent harassment of her, and secondly, Pech could have chosen not to harass her. He was deemed, weeks later, to be nothing more than obsessive and jealous. He was not psychopathic.
When I arrived at the police station, I asked, as I would always do in this sort of offence, whether there were any psychiatric problems and whether there was a need for an appropriate adult. And I spoke to the doctor and I asked him about it, and he was very open, very helpful. He said that he'd examined him fully. There were no psychiatric problems, and that he just put it down to love and obsessional love behaviour.
Clare was wrong in expecting the sight of the flowers from Pech rotting away outside her front door day after day to put an end to Pech's intrusive behaviour towards her. Pech got her the flowers the day after he'd come round and then refused to leave, and he got them to her by following her home. He responded to her rejection of both him and his flowers by staging a stakeout outside her home. It was the second time in as many days. While vastly unpleasant, the ensuing multiple daily text messages and phone calls from Pech are forms of harassment that Clare can practically ignore. Pech's workplace harassment of her, on the other hand, isn't. He stalks her, stares at her, comes up to her, torments her.
At work, Michael has constantly approached my counter whilst both on duty and pestered me to rekindle the relationship. I've often seen him nearby, just staring at me, and on some occasions I feel like he's using nearby mirrors to observe me.
So, when, on the persuasion of her colleagues, Clare agreed to speak to Pech, she naturally reaffirmed that she wanted nothing to do with him. It is, of course, Pech that she sees in front of her when, later on leaving the store at the end of her shift, she turns around to see who has just taken hold of her two shoulders. Pech doesn't care that people walking past have heard him thundering at Clare, who has just stated that she doesn't love him. Yes, you do, you stupid little girl. Clare cares, though, of course, and at the point when she reports Pech's relentless harassment of her to management at Harvey Nichols, she has suffered poor physical health as well as mental torment. From conveying apparently sincere and undying love and devotion for Clare, you see, Pech's countless daily text messages has switched to saying things like, "If I can't have you, no one will." There's been an occasion where, at a tube station, Pech pushed Clare to the ground. This had come after Pech had followed Clare into a carriage of the train and then followed her again when she got off, which she did at the very next stop precisely to escape him. I imagine that people saw Clare acting with panic in the carriage and then being knocked to the ground by Pech once she got off. However people may have reacted, Pech again presumably just didn't care. After pushing her down at the underground station, London Bridge, he had followed her to another train and brazenly banged on the window while yelling at her. This had been after answering Clare's threat to report him, which she made after he pushed her down, with his own threat to kill her if she did so.
Clare changed onto another train, but Pech continued to follow her. She warned him she would call the police if he didn't leave her alone.
I then said to him, "If you leave now, I won't report you." He then started to be nice by trying to touch my face and kiss me, but I pushed him away. He then started to apologise, then got off the train.
And all along, Pech's stakeouts of Clare's flat had continued, as had his stalking her at work. It didn't take Pech long to find out where Clare had moved to after she and her flatmate moved out of their previous flat because of him. Having no regard, you understand, for his bail conditions, which prohibited him from contacting Clare in any way, Pech still kept staking her out at her home. Likewise, even when, weeks before, he was moved to a different floor at work and admonished to stay away from Clare at all costs, his behaviour towards Clare didn't change. He had nowhere to hide when Clare reported his behaviour to management. His harassment of her had been caught on camera. Being sacked, as he subsequently was, didn't seem to bother him, and it certainly didn't stop him stalking Clare outside of work. Neither did being arrested and charged for harassing Clare. Pech had proven, with his first arrest, that he couldn't be trusted to keep to his bail conditions. Given this, and given that his second arrest was for a much more serious offence against Clare, it is shocking, I think many would agree, that A, he made bail a second time, having been charged with threatening to kill, and B, nobody told Clare that he was out on bail.
The bail conditions failed to deter Pech from going near Clare. Just 4 days after they were set, he appeared again outside her home. Clare called the police, who immediately arrested Pech for breaking his bail conditions. Pech was remanded in Belmarsh prison, and the trial date was set for the 31st of August.
We just knew that he was arrested on the 10th and that Clare never saw him again. Then we felt that the system was working.
But did the system work or did it fail? Just a week after Michael Pech was remanded in custody in Belmarsh prison, he was let out a full 4 months before he was due to stand trial for harassing Clare. And in that 4 months came a series of events that was to end in her death.
Pech certainly had luck on his side. The Luger handgun that he hid in his luggage on his way back from Slovakia to England, a trip that he made during his second bail period, went undetected. Neither Pech nor his luggage was searched, you see. Pech had travelled by coach. Pech had had no difficulty in procuring the gun and registering it with the police in his home country, since his criminal behaviour from England was wholly unknown there. Pech gets to practice shooting at a firing range over a number of days. He was probably just refreshing his marksmanship. Pech had served in the Slovakian army for 6 years. Pech had been able to travel abroad because he still had his passport. It hadn't been confiscated, such as usually happens when criminal suspects are bailed. And of course, there was his bail itself, wholly undeserved, thoroughly unfair to Clare, and devastatingly reckless. The findings of the inquest into Clare's death were that Clare had been unlawfully killed, but that her death could not have been anticipated. The counter to that, though, as I believe many will agree, is that the matter of anticipating Clare's murder is actually irrelevant. What actually is of relevance is the matter of the second granting of bail to Pech, and the matter of Pech's having retained possession of his passport. Pech's previously clean record had also gone in his favour. But experts now say that, in assessing Pech's threat level towards Clare, police should have considered some other key points to Pech's individual case. How long he stalked Clare for, where he worked, his threats to kill Clare, and his time in the army are, to be exact, what should have led police to deem Pech's threat level to Clare to be high.
Firstly, this man was persistent. 50% of harassment cases stopped within 2 weeks. His did not. Secondly, he was working in the same place as Miss Bernal. In the literature, this is an important risk factor. Thirdly, he was making threats to kill her. And fourthly, an important fact about him is that he had military service and was familiar with firearms.
In actual fact, police never carried out any assessment of Pech's risk to Clare. When Pech murdered Clare, he was high on cocaine. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.